You are living in a time that makes deep focus feel unnatural. Never in history have people had more access to knowledge, more tools for creation, and more reasons to do meaningful work, yet so many cannot sit with one thought for more than a few minutes without reaching for stimulation. That contradiction is not small. It is one of the defining psychological problems of modern life. We are surrounded by abundance, but starved of attention. We are flooded with information, but unable to stay still long enough to turn it into insight. Most people call this distraction, but that word is too soft for what is really happening. This is not just a harmless habit of checking your phone or drifting for a moment. It is a daily assault on the mind's ability to remain whole. Your attention is pulled apart by alerts, speed, noise, novelty, expectation, and the quiet pressure to always be consuming something. The result is not simply wasted time. The result is fractured thinking. And when thinking becomes fractured, so does everything built on top of it. Learning, creativity, confidence, judgment, and even your sense of inner control. That is why the struggle to focus feels so personal. It does not just interrupt your work. It makes you feel weak in front of your own intentions. You decide to read, but your mind wanders. You sit down to think, but restlessness begins almost immediately. You try to enter a difficult problem, but another impulse appears, offering something easier, faster, lighter. Over time, this begins to feel like a character flaw, as if serious concentration belongs to a different kind of person, as if your mind is simply not built for depth. But that is the first lie you need to reject. The problem is not that you are incapable of focus. The problem is that you have been placed inside an environment that trains the opposite. A distracted world produces distracted minds not because people are lazy, but because their attention is being conditioned into constant movement. What feels natural to you may only be what has been repeated enough times to become automatic. Mental fragmentation can become so familiar that stillness starts to feel uncomfortable, even threatening. This is what makes deep focus so rare now. It is not rare because it is mystical. It is rare because almost everything around you is designed to prevent it. The modern mind is encouraged to skim instead of study, react instead of reflect, and switch instead of stay. Under those conditions, the ability to hold your attention on one thing becomes more than a productivity skill. It becomes a form of resistance, a refusal to let your mind be scattered into pieces by forces that profit from your fragmentation. And once you understand that, the entire problem changes shape. Focus is no longer just about getting more done. It is about recovering authority over your own mind. It is about rebuilding the power to stay with one thought long enough for something real to happen. Because before deep work becomes possible, you first have to understand the war being fought against your attention every single day. If your mind refuses to stay with one thing, it is not because it hates effort. It is because it has been trained to expect reward without depth. Modern distraction is not random. It follows a pattern. Every quick notification, every short video, every easy switch between tasks teaches the brain the same lesson. Do not stay, do not struggle, do not go deeper than the first layer. Keep moving, keep scanning, keep searching for the next small hit of stimulation. That pattern is dangerous because the brain adapts to whatever it repeats. If you live in constant novelty, your attention begins to depend on novelty. If you keep rewarding yourself for switching, your mind becomes less willing to remain with anything that unfolds slowly. This is why deep focus can feel unnatural even when you want it badly. It is not that your goals are weak. It is that your habits have educated your nervous system to crave interruption more than immersion. And shallow attention always feels easier in the moment. It gives you movement without resistance. You can jump between tabs, check messages, skim articles, listen halfway, think halfway, and still feel active. But activity is not depth. Motion is not progress. A mind that is always moving may look busy from the outside while remaining mentally starved on the inside. Because real thinking requires something distraction cannot tolerate: sustained contact with difficulty. That is exactly what fragmented attention destroys. The moment a task becomes cognitively demanding, the distracted mind starts looking for escape. Not because the task is impossible, but because difficulty now feels like deprivation. When you are used to constant stimulation, concentration starts to feel empty, and emptiness becomes unbearable. So you reach for something easier. Another thought, another app, another check, another excuse to leave the problem before it has time to open. The tragedy is that this escape feels harmless, while quietly training weakness. Over time, this changes more than your productivity. It changes the quality of your intelligence. Scattered attention weakens memory because nothing stays long enough to form structure. It weakens judgment because you stop following ideas to their consequences. It weakens creativity because original thought rarely appears in a rushed, interrupted mind. And it weakens confidence because part of you knows you are no longer directing your attention. You are reacting with it. That is why distraction creates such a private kind of frustration. It is not only lost time. It is the painful sense that your mind is no longer fully under your command. The deeper problem is that shallow attention creates the illusion of engagement. You can consume endless information and still never enter into relationship with any of it. You recognize ideas without digesting them. You touch concepts without inhabiting them. You mistake exposure for understanding, and mental movement for mental growth. This is how people become informed but not transformed, stimulated but not sharpened. Most people think focus fails in dramatic moments, but it usually fails in tiny permissions. A glance at the phone, a quick check, a brief mental detour. Each one seems small, yet each one teaches the same rule. Leave when depth demands something from you. That is how attention becomes unstable. Not through one collapse, but through small exits that slowly convince the mind that staying is always optional. Before you can focus deeply, you have to understand why your mind has become so fluent in escape. Feynman understood something most people miss about focus. The mind does not go deep through force alone. It goes deep when attention becomes alive. Most people treat concentration like a battle of willpower, as if the only question is how hard you can push against distraction. Feynman's example suggests something more subtle. Real focus is not merely the suppression of wandering. It is the active capture of the mind by something that becomes more interesting than escape. That matters, because brute force breaks quickly. You can pressure yourself into attention for a few minutes, maybe longer on a good day, but strain by itself rarely creates immersion. The mind rebels when it feels trapped. What keeps attention steady is not only discipline, but engagement. Feynman had that rare ability to become fascinated by a problem, to stay with it long enough for it to stop feeling like an assignment and start feeling like a living question. Once that shift happens, focus stops being a prison and becomes a form of absorption. This is why curiosity is more powerful than most people realize. Not shallow curiosity, the kind that jumps from one novelty to another, but disciplined curiosity, the willingness to remain with a problem because something inside it continues to pull you deeper. Feynman did not just look at subjects from the outside. He entered them. He played with them, questioned them, reduced them, rephrased them, turned them around in his mind until they started to reveal structure. That kind of attention is not passive. It is dynamic, intimate, and relentless. He also understood the value of simplicity. A cluttered mind cannot go deep because it keeps tripping over noise. Feynman stripped ideas down to their essential logic. He removed decorative complexity and kept returning to the question beneath the question, what is really happening here? That move is crucial for focus. When a problem feels vague, overwhelming, or inflated by unnecessary language, attention weakens. But when you simplify the frame and isolate the real issue, the mind can lock in. Focus grows stronger when reality becomes clearer. This is one of the biggest differences between shallow work and deep work. Shallow work keeps attention dispersed across surfaces. Deep work gathers it around a central living thread. Feynman followed that thread with unusual honesty. If he did not understand something, he did not hide behind jargon. He stayed with the gap. He let the discomfort sharpen the question instead of using distraction to escape it. That is what serious attention looks like. Not endless strain, but sustained contact with something meaningful enough to deserve your full mind. There is another lesson hidden in this. Deep focus is not created by loving only easy things. It is created by learning how to find life inside difficult things. Feynman could become absorbed because he did not approach complexity as dead material to be endured. He treated it as something to uncover. That transformed attention. Difficulty stopped feeling like resistance and started feeling like invitation. The problem was no longer just something to finish. It became something to penetrate. And that is the deeper secret of attention. The brain focuses best when it is not merely restrained, but recruited. When interest, clarity, and challenge converge, attention stops leaking so easily. You are no longer trying to force your mind away from distraction. You are giving it something richer than distraction. Feynman understood that the strongest concentration is not cold, mechanical, or empty. It is warm with curiosity, sharp with purpose, and disciplined enough to remain in contact with reality until understanding begins to form. That is why his attention had depth. He did not split himself between the task and the temptation to flee it. He gave himself to the work completely enough that the work started giving something back. Most people wait for focus to feel easy before they commit. Feynman committed until the mind crossed a threshold and began generating momentum. That is a different model of concentration. It says the reward is not always at the beginning. Sometimes the reward appears only after you stay long enough for the mind to stop skimming and start entering. If deep focus is possible, then it must also be trainable. That is the part most people miss. They treat concentration like a personality trait, something you either have or do not have, as if a distracted mind is a permanent identity. But attention is shaped by repetition. The brain becomes what it practices. If you repeatedly teach it to scatter, it will scatter faster. If you repeatedly teach it to stay, it will begin to discover that staying is no longer torture. It becomes capacity. That means deep focus is not built in one heroic moment. It is built by changing the conditions under which your mind operates. First, you have to reduce the amount of unnecessary friction between your intention and the task. Most people try to focus while leaving every doorway to distraction wide open. Their phone is nearby. Their tabs are multiplying. Their environment is filled with cues that invite escape. Then they blame themselves when attention keeps slipping. But focus cannot grow in an environment designed for interruption. You cannot demand depth while constantly rehearsing departure. This is why removing distraction is not weakness. It is training. When you clear the field around your attention, you are teaching the brain a new rule. This is the place where we stay. That may sound simple, but it changes everything. Each time you remain with one meaningful thing without rewarding the impulse to leave, you strengthen the mind's tolerance for depth. You prove that restlessness does not have to be obeyed. You create a small act of internal authority, and those acts accumulate. The next step is narrowing attention. Many people fail to focus because they approach work as a vague mass. Their mind sees too many open loops at once, so it keeps jumping between them instead of entering any one of them. Feynman's style suggests the opposite. Reduce the frame. Choose the real question. Find the live edge of the problem and direct your full attention there. Focus is not intensity spread across 10 things. It is intensity gathered around one thing long enough for structure to appear. This is also where difficulty becomes decisive. A weak attention span is not only the result of external distraction, it is also the result of habitual escape from cognitive discomfort. The moment thinking becomes effortful, the untrained mind starts negotiating with itself. It wants relief, novelty, movement, anything except sustained contact with what it cannot yet resolve. But that exact moment is where focus is either built or broken. If you leave, you strengthen avoidance. If you stay, even imperfectly, you begin building depth. At first, staying will feel unnatural. Your mind will resist. It will produce random thoughts, invented urgencies, and 100 persuasive reasons to stop. That does not mean the process is failing. It means you are meeting the friction that shallow habits once hid from you. Real focus is not the absence of mental resistance. It is the decision to continue despite it until resistance loses some of its force. Over time, something important happens. The mind becomes less frantic. What once felt unbearable starts feeling normal. You enter tasks faster. You recover from distraction more cleanly. You stop panicking at the first sign of difficulty. This is when deep focus stops being an occasional accident and starts becoming part of your mental character. Not because you are forcing your brain with constant aggression, but because you have trained it to remain in honest contact with one thing long enough to go beneath the surface. That is the point. Focus is not raw intensity without direction. It is disciplined continuity. It is the ability to remain with what matters long enough for meaning, understanding, and real progress to emerge. And every time you choose depth over escape, you are building exactly that kind of mind. The ability to focus deeply has become so rare that many people no longer recognize it when they see it. They recognize busyness. They recognize responsiveness. They recognize speed, multitasking, constant output, and the performance of being mentally occupied. But deep focus is different. It is quieter, less visible, and far more powerful. It does not create the impression of urgency. It creates contact with reality. And in a world addicted to interruption, that kind of contact is becoming one of the most valuable forms of mental strength a person can possess. Most people never develop it because almost everything in modern life trains the opposite. They learn to live in fragments. Their attention is divided before the day begins. Their thoughts are interrupted before they become clear. Their mind is conditioned to leave before understanding has time to form. Over time, this feels normal. They mistake constant stimulation for aliveness, constant reaction for engagement, and constant movement for progress. But a mind that is always reacting rarely becomes powerful. It becomes dependent. It needs novelty to feel awake and distraction to avoid depth. That is why deep focus is no longer just a productivity advantage. It is a human advantage. The person who can stay with one idea, one problem, one meaningful piece of work long enough to go beneath the surface has access to something increasingly scarce. They can think while others merely consume. They can create while others only respond. They can understand while others stay trapped at the level of impression. In practical terms, that means better judgment, better work, better learning, better problem solving, and a greater ability to remain calm in a noisy world. This is also why deep focus changes your relationship with yourself. It builds a kind of trust that shallow attention can never give you. When you know you can direct your mind, hold it steady, and return it when it drifts, you stop feeling like a prisoner of impulse. You stop experiencing your own attention as an unreliable force that abandons you the moment things become difficult. Instead, you begin to feel an inner solidity. You become someone who can stay. And that changes more than output. It changes identity. Richard Feynman represents that standard so powerfully because he reminds us that serious thought is not loud. It is not frantic. It is not endlessly scattered across inputs. It is patient enough to remain with a question until the question opens. It is curious enough to keep going when the first answer is not enough, and it is disciplined enough to reject the false rewards of easy stimulation in exchange for something deeper, genuine insight. That is the real meaning of deep focus. Not punishment, not grim self-control, the ability to bring your whole mind into contact with what matters. So the final question is not whether deep focus is possible. It is whether you are willing to become the kind of person who values it enough to train it. Because every day, your habits are answering that question for you. Every small distraction you obey is a vote for fragmentation. Every moment you stay, return, and go deeper is a vote for mental power. That may sound dramatic, but it is true. Attention is not neutral. It becomes the architecture of your life. In the years ahead, the people who can think deeply will not simply have an advantage. They will feel like a different species of mind. While others are pulled apart by noise, they will still be capable of understanding something fully, and that ability may be rarer and more decisive than almost any talent people chase today. So if you want real power, start here. Protect your attention. Train your mind to stay, because the line between shallow living and serious thinking is now drawn exactly where your focus breaks or holds.